Well, Dr. Alan Moran, thank you so much for joining us on the Supply Side podcast. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, you're welcome, Jonathan.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. There's a couple of key articles that you've written recently that I think people are going to be very interested to hear your perspective on. And as I've gone through some of your background, I think you've got, you're writing so much, you're writing well, and there's so much that I think you've got to share with us. So I'm just going to spin people quickly through a little walk down memory lane. We're going to look back at some of your journey in government policy, in the public sector, in areas of regulation, environment. So, educated in the United Kingdom and a PhD from the University of Liverpool in transport economics, and also degrees from Salford, University of Salford, and the London School of Economics. And as I often say to my kids, whoever dies with the most degrees wins. So you've done well there. And your professional life's included 18 years as the director of the deregulation unit at the Institute of Public Affairs. You've been a senior official at the Productivity Commission, and then the director of the Commonwealth Office of Regulation Review. And when I found that out, I thought we definitely need some review of regulation. So I'm really looking forward to hearing you talk about that. You've published widely, you're writing continually. Your latest book is called Climate Change, Trump and Policy. Climate Change Treaties and Policies in the Trump Era. So here's my first question. When I was in high school, I wanted to either fly F-18 fighter jets or be a spy. What led you into this journey of this amazing professional journey? What were you always interested in some of these global economic trends? Tell us about your journey.
Well, I mean, it's not all that spectacular. I worked in the energy area very soon after getting my PhD in the UK. I actually worked for something called the Gas Council, which is an umbrella organization involved in gas. And I worked in the motor industry in the UK as well. I came out here because I saw what looked like at the time quite an attractive job, which was the senior economist in the Department of Trade. And I progressed through the bureaucracy in various ways for about 13 or 14 years before realizing that a bullet was heading to me as Labour was in power, and they were gradually isolating me from various policy areas. And I joined a think tank, what one first called the Tasman Institute. I worked a little while again later in the Victorian government when there were privatization, the energy assets was taking place. And then, as you say, I worked in think tanks in the Institute of Public Affairs, and now my own organization, Regulation Economics. And I sort of drifted into the area of regulatory issues and how governments were stymieing the efficiency of the private sector, and are continuing to do so.
Because it's an interesting journey, because to have spent, you've seen both sides here. You've had a long journey in the public sector, and that's informed a lot of the work you're doing now. Would you describe yourself as having a particular, being a member of a particular economic school?
Well, I guess the school would be called SupplySide, if anything, and essentially it's an emphasis on the ability to produce things for the economy, enables us to have high living standards, and that's often forgotten. The dominant paradigm in economics is Keynesian or even monetarist, whatever, and it basically having people as fixers, having people trying to manipulate the economy into doing better than it is, and in doing so, they generally make it far worse than it is. And there's a kind of an obliviousness to the importance of reinforcing our ability to produce things cheaply, which means more capital investment, means more R&D, and better training of the labor force, etc. There's a seeming inability to understand that this is the cause of growth, and essentially what Treasury departments do is stimulate the economy, and that's music to the ears of politicians, of course, with additional expenditure, and in doing so they undermine the productive capabilities of the economy, and we're seeing that very much at the present time.
Yeah, we had a great conversation last week with Nathan Lewis, who's been on the show a couple of times, who writes brilliantly on classical gold standards. And in his latest analysis, he's quite funny, and he has this line where he says, he's talking about MMT, and he said that MMT is the process by which governments spend huge amounts of money, which is enormously popular until it isn't. I liked that line, because there's definitely a teleology, there's a trajectory, I think, that we're on. And let's get into that, because there's two articles of yours that I want to talk about. The first one you wrote back in January 2020. And when I went back through it today, it's that weird sense of this was just before COVID really kicked off. And I looked at the date and I thought, gosh, if I knew what markets were going to do 2 months after you wrote this, it'd be a different life. But you wrote a great article called "Wealth Will Weaken Us If We Ever Yield to Populism." And to give people some background, you were writing here about Stanford's Mont Pelerin Society, which was obviously, set up post-World War II as a kind of intellectual salon contra, Marxist, dialectic and scientific materialism. But you write in this article that what you're observing is a shift in confidence from that broad capitalist model, the ability of capitalism to lift people out of poverty. And you're sensing a loss of confidence in that, which is obviously being played out by so much of what we're seeing. Can you take us through some of that? Just walk us through what compelled you to write that, what you're thinking in that area?
Well, I just we saw the period of microeconomic reform, we called it in Australia, in the late 80s and the 90s, when we saw privatizations in place, we saw competition policy, and this basically brought about a much deeper productivity gain in the economy as a whole, and we're still basking in living standards as a result of that. But there was a loss of confidence, I think, as on the part of the people as a whole. Maybe the politicians didn't explain what was going on very well, but one way or another, there was this feeling that we ought to actually intervene in capitalism more, because the rich were getting richer and the poor were getting poorer. The same sort of dialogue that came out of Marxism. Not exactly true, but nonetheless, there was this feeling that there was a lot of unfairness around, and that we ought to actually intervene to ensure that we get a fairer split up. And this percolated, of course, into the political class itself, because after all, they just reflect what people are saying to a very great degree. And it's resulted in as clogging up the works of capitalism, because it's all very well to say, well, we ought to get a better division of the spoils than is being achieved. But every time you do that, that has some disincentive effects on the people who are creating the wealth. And the more you do it, of course, the more that disincentive effect is in place. So, and this was becoming apparent indeed in that Stanford conference in the US, where there was a feeling that there was a great deal more intervention coming through. And I was writing basically to say, this is a great pity, and unless we do something about it, we will see much more sluggish economies. And of course, since then, we've seen far greater interventions in the economy, partly through COVID, but COVID has just been an excuse of massive interventions, and indeed we now face quite serious, or much more serious repercussions as a result of the ensuing debt and the debilitation of the incentive to invest in productive matters.
What do you think is the ultimate intellectual epistemological engine behind this kind of shift? Like, people, often will talk about Foucault, this, reducing everything to, the dialectic of power, and that, some of the stuff in that first article you're talking about, the aggregate share of income for the rich has grown rapidly. Middle class is in heavy decline, and the poor's had a marginal decline. And you write here that really what this is going to drive is increasing levels of social division, even violence. What do you think's ultimately at the heart of it? What do you think is driving this shift from the belief that capitalism was transformative. It was going to and it did lift people out of poverty. What if you had to pick one or two key drivers, what would you pick?
I don't know that there are key drivers. I think there is something, essentially capitalism does reward the greatest producers by the greatest amount. I mean, if I liken it a bit to a lot of other things, like, for example, pop music. The difference between the Rolling Stones and some other group who are playing is not great. However, the Rolling Stones earn 100 times as much as this other group. And you can see that in terms of the earners in the IT industry as well. There is a kind of those people who are earning the most, who are producing the most, tend to earn the most as well. And this actually does create an envy on the part of a lot of people, even though other people, as we've seen in our society, are basically enjoying massive increases in standard of living themselves. They're not as high as those at the top, and there is an envy there as a result. And there is a feeling that if only we could get some more of that income from the top to the bottom or the middle, we'll all be better off. And there is, there's always this this thinking that essentially that the wealth will be created anyway. That we don't understand that the wealth is created because people have actually gone out there, seized opportunities, invented things, and then sold them to the rest of us. And in doing so, they earn high incomes, but there is then a trickle down, and trickle down has become a sense, a sense of an odious concept.
Yeah, it's almost pejorative. Yeah,
exactly. And yet that is the way we enriched ourselves in the first place, and that is the way we continue to enrich ourselves. By ensuring that that there is sufficient incentive for people to go out there, invent new things, and risk their own savings, be parsimonious in terms of their consumption, and save more themselves, and thereby generate higher incomes for themselves and for all of those around them.
I'd be interested in your take on something I read a couple of years back, which was that when you look at the Gilded Age, and I read a fantastic biography on Rockefeller a couple of years back, when you look at that, at the Rockefellers and John Paul Getty and all those guys, that huge growth in wealth, the argument was that it also created a lot of employment. So as railroads rolled out, there was a lot more employment, and obviously there was an investment in infrastructure that the railroads created. One argument I sort of came across was that the modern tech giants are simply not employing the numbers of people, and also the cash that they're making is tending to sit in war chests. It's tending to sit on balance sheets and not end up. Have you got any thoughts on that? Like, is that a significant difference compared to the kind of explosive growth of the Gilded Age? Is it similar?
I'd say it's more similar than you'd think. Of course, the Gilded Age, you saw, oil fields, and you saw railways, and you saw things you could touch and things, which is less so in the modern IT age. But the IT area does employ lots and lots of people. I mean, I had 10% of employment in one way or another. Employs lots of people, and the fact is, that if it creates wealth, that wealth will be spent. If it sits on balance sheets, you can't really hide wealth under your bed. If it sits on balance in a bank somewhere, and the bank then has got money and it's lending the money out to other people, the answer is that there's been an enormous increase in GDP as a result of the people of the Apples and the Facebook of this world, an enormous increase in wealth, and that it has made mega bucks for the people involved, but it's trickled down to the rest of us as well.
Yeah. I said to Nathan last week on the show, there's a brilliant recent discussion between Jordan Peterson and a guy that runs I think it's humanprogress.org, and they're tracking things like, over the last 50 years, the number of people who've moved out of absolute poverty, the the changes in infant mortality, the changes for women. Like there's actually about 10 or 20 major indicators that things are actually surprisingly good. So I get confused every day when I look at global macro. I go, is the world coming to an end? Is it better? Or, sometimes it's hard to know. A couple of other things from this first article. You mentioned here that obviously what we're seeing is a huge increase in government size and this big increase, and you write about this a fair bit in terms of environmental regulation. Well, for our American listeners, we have a coal mine here, and you mentioned this Adani that took 9 years to be approved. Tell us a little bit about that, the shift from the idea that the capitalism was about growth and development, and you are identifying a big shift now, aren't you? Seeing increasing government and increasing regulation.
Yeah, there's been possibly partly understandable anyway, that a shift away from as reveling in the increase in taming nature, if you like, taming nature and making nature productive to us, to actually saying, well, no, we've got to do the opposite. We've got to turn it back. I mean, that we can see that with the environmental impact statements being required in the Adani case, which had a trivial effect on the environment, but which faced massive amounts of protests and a great deal of environmental legislative barriers as well, all of which is costing us a lot of money. If you think in terms of, I think in terms of, say, basic projects which were built 30 years ago or something by Western Mining. They discovered a nickel deposit. They thought, oh, that's pretty good. Within 2 years, it was up and running. Now, that the contrast now with Adani and anything else is quite stark. And in fact, even the latest budget, we essentially the National Party is saying, what a great idea. What we'll do, we'll have these subsidies to farmers, essentially to stop farming. And a little proud who's the minister there for farmers essentially is saying, well, he doesn't quite say it like this, but what he means is we'll take 16% out of the farming acreage that we have in Australia, and we'll have that as carbon capture and storage with a few incentives, etc. I mean, this is basically, we're derating our economy, and we've seen that elsewhere. We've seen it in terms of the Murray River, the irrigation there. Essentially, this is a river. It's a working river. It's a fine river. It can never be the same as it was 200 years ago, but it's fine. The river is working well. But we have groups of activists who'll come in and say, no, the river gums need a drink, or this needs a drink, or whatever. We've got to take money from these irrigators and let it go into the environment. So we've taken sort of 20% of the water from the irrigators, which basically means we've got considerably less productivity in that area, which is a very significant area. The Murray-Darling, it's about 30 or 35 or 40% of our agricultural production is in that area. Most of it irrigated. So, we're derating the economy in response to activist environmental claims that we're all going to the dogs, whereas in fact, in terms of of what used to be the criteria for environment, clean air, clean water, clean, etc., is massively improved than what it was. And the only thing that you can point to conceivably where it's not is the increase in carbon dioxide emissions, which is driving this massive debate on energy and other things globally.
You don't strike me as someone given to hyperbole. So what do you make of, is it a cultural death wish? Like, it's kind of like, here we have all this productive land, and as I think I'm correct in saying, the most advanced economies tend to have the best environments because we deploy the best technologies for looking after the environment. Is it a cultural death wish? What do you think's behind it?
Well, I don't think it's a cultural death wish, but there is a self-harm as a result of focusing on particular facets which you think are have not been looked after enough. If people talk about deforestation, well, quite frankly, we have as much forest in Australia now as we did in the year 1900, because we cut a lot of the forest down in the early, and then gradually it's been grown again, and the land which has been submarginal has grown trees on it. Some, but only a little bit, is because of set-asides, but from the national parks. But you know that if you look at just about any environmental measure, and I think this was behind your question there, it's gotten better, and it gets better all the time under capitalism. That's what capitalism does. It makes us richer and allows us then to select things to be preserved that otherwise wouldn't be preserved. And quite frankly, it's moved us way beyond what is reasonable in terms of that at the present stage in Australia and many other Western countries.
Yeah, referencing back to that Jordan Peterson interview on the indicators of things improving in the world, the data they were quoting from the UN, which doesn't tend to see the light of day, this piece of data, but that the planet can reasonably sustain somewhere north of 8 to 9 billion. And then they're suggesting there'll be a gradual population decline. So all those Malthusian predictions of, mass starvation don't seem to have eventuated at this point.
And indeed, no matter what we do in the economy, we do an awful lot of things. For example, we're forcing synthetic gasoline essentially through taking out produce from corn, etc. And no matter what we do, the crop yields increase year by year. We're getting better at it year by year. There's the whole idea of famine, which was besetting humans all over the world every so often a couple of centuries ago, is just absurd now. There couldn't be any famine. I mean, the only famine is created by warfare or whatever, and despoilation of politics. There's no famine possible anywhere in the world at this juncture, unless we suddenly go backwards and prevent agricultural production.
Yeah, so true. I remember reading a book on the currency crisis in Zimbabwe, and you get starvation in places like that when you get complete currency collapse and maladministration. It's interesting you say with the famines. I'm showing my age a little, but growing up as a kid, I can remember seeing the footage of famines in Ethiopia, and again, this what I was listening to last week. They're just saying you just don't see them like that anymore. I mean, there are a handful of places in the world, North Korea, for example, where it still happens. But so I wanted to ask you, it's very easy to have a broad brush and say we need massive deregulation and just open slather. But my sense with you is that with all your background in the regulatory sphere, there obviously is a place for regulation. Yeah, I mean, where do you see regulation being useful and effective?
Well, I think there's some elements, certainly when there's what economists call externalities or side effects of things. Clean air, for example. The measures to prevent pollution of sulfur and other things, and lead, etc., are all pretty good. I mean, these things people make profit off, but they then have adverse implications on others. So the regulations in those kinds of areas are, I think, quite beneficial. There is a suggestion, there is a case for regulation where there's monopoly as well. That's less of a convincing case to me, because whenever a monopoly exists, the monopolist, of course, price gouges, is quite normal, and then that also then attracts things which break the monopoly, and you mentioned earlier the Rockefellers, etc.
Yeah.
Essentially, Rockefeller, I don't think he was price gouging, but he was certainly earning a lot of money, and it did create an awful lot of newcomers into the market. And by the time that Rockefeller Standard Oil was broken up, it was far from a monopoly. It probably only had about 30 or 40% of the market. Yeah. So others, Shell, etc., Shell and BP and Amoco, etc., had come in, but Texas had come in basically to undermine the monopoly. And you know, we found that also with some of the early data was on railroads. Okay, a railroad is a monopoly, and suddenly you found other railroads being built. When if the railroad was acting as a price gouger, it did attract opposition, and we found that generally. So you know, in areas of economy, I can't really see much of a case for us intervening. The areas where we might intervene are in areas of environment, maybe issues of public safety, safety in food and things like that. There is a case for putting it in there, because the argument is that if we didn't have that, of course, firms make their reputation by not poisoning us with the food, and therefore they take considerable steps. But it's arguable that they wouldn't take as much without there was some sort of requirement on the part of governments to investigate things before they're done.
Yeah, it's a pretty effective marketing tool to not poison your customers. I think it keeps them coming back. It's fascinating to listen to you. You said a moment ago that outside of these few key areas, you don't see a huge need for intervention. And listening to that, we're in this incredibly interventionist moment. I've often quoted a line from Murray Rothbard's book, The Case Against the Fed, where he argues that there's only three places a government should be involved, only three, and that was the guarantee of private contracts, so enforcement of contracts, the national defense, and the protection of physical and personal property. It was quite striking because the amount of intervention and regulation is quite extraordinary. So after all those, sorry,
those Rothbard tenets are the key tenets. I mean, most people wouldn't regard that as regulation, although of course it is regulation because it's state control. But the regulation it comes over and above those basic frameworks which hold society together.
Yeah, well, I've still got 3 young children, and I find myself so constantly saying things like, "No, we're not allowed to do that. No, we're not allowed to do that. No, we can't do that. We're not allowed to do that." And it's just fascinating. It's yeah. So yeah, look, the other thing I wanted to talk about is this second article which you wrote, which is where I first reached out to you. You wrote an article earlier in the week called "Enjoy the Sugar Hit as We Flirt with Economic Ruin." And I'll just give you an interest. The opening line you wrote here was very good. You said, economic growth requires political stability and secure property rights. Its drivers include low taxation, an educated, skilled workforce, and technological innovation. But the overwhelming influence is investment in business activities, roads, and other infrastructure. So you make a point that historically in Australia, for example, at our best, 20 to 25% of GDP has gone into business investment. We're now down around 10. Surrounding Asian nations are over 20. Take us through your thesis in that article. What are you trying to tell people on this issue of investment in business and business investment from government?
Yeah, well, I think the thing that irked me and prompted me to write the article was the budget, and looking at it where the government was preening itself, saying that we've basically done extremely well in COVID. Our society, our economy is roaring ahead, and aren't we clever for doing it? Well, the thing that that struck me is basically the reason why we're recovering from COVID is because the government has taken the brakes off. COVID wasn't like a war where we've actually destroyed capital investment, we've destroyed an awful lot of things, and we're all going to be poorer as a result. Essentially, it just forced many of us to take a year off. But the basic structure of the economy was the same. So as soon as the brakes were taken off by the government, then we recovered. And who could have anticipated anything other than that? We're bound to recover. Of course, that didn't mean a lot of people made financial losses, and that was terrible for them. But essentially, the structure of the economy remained the same. But what didn't remain the same is the government's intervention, the government's massive increase in spending. This combined with other policies that they've put in place in terms of energy and in terms of, we talked about land before elsewhere, has actually been a great disstimulus to investment. And we've seen investment now probably pretty much at the lowest level it's been, certainly for 50 years, as a share of GDP. And one of the things that fails to be recognized by treasury departments who have the economic models, and they basically say, oh, okay, if you increase government spending or investment spending or consumer spending, it all increases GDP, which of course doesn't. You've actually got to get back to, and this comes back to my philosophy in economics, the supply side. You can always stimulate the economy, and that will mean more income, but it may not mean, but it's unlikely to mean more real income. It mean just inflation. And if we've stimulated the economy now with 7% deficits, with quite a very big increase in the money supply over recent years through government borrowing and just through government injection of money into the banking system. But this is not supporting, or has not been supported by, increased investment. And this means in the end, we must face lower standard of living, certainly lower standard of living than we would have had if once we were investing that much money. Australia's had, as a result, I guess, of taxation policies and various other things, quite a low savings rate compared to other countries. And we've always imported capital investment on quite a considerable scale, about 10% of savings, which probably means about 20% of business savings or business investment comes from overseas, which is quite unhealthy for an economy which is quite rich. We're importing savings from India and from China, economies which are much face a lot of poverty still, but certainly not as rich as we are. So basically, we have been importing a lot of capital to supplement our savings, and now we're not even investing. We're not investing anything like as much as we should, and really it comes back to the government's seizing a lot of income for its own spending, and therefore not investing. When government does invest, it tends to invest in low returning. It tends to be involved in political type investments rather than maximizing profit, which is the key to efficient investment.
I listen to you and I keep thinking of George Gilder's, his book Knowledge and Power, the sort of information theory of capitalism, that what capitalism does at its best is coordinate these vast amounts of interactions and human motivations, and it's the invisible hand perhaps, but it's, when you read it and you think about it, it's an extraordinary thing, and this idea that government can figure all that out more effectively than people left to work that out. And I often say on the show that the US Federal Reserve System has over just short of 1,500 PhDs on staff across the different reserves. And you look at the boom bust, the deficits, and you're going, they're not getting a lot of value out of some of the PhDs at the moment. So it's interesting to see what happens in this moment we're in historically. You also say in the article, it really struck me that 15 years ago, Australia was debt free. And now I think we're running just north of 40%, which comparatively, I think the US is pushing 130% of debt to GDP now. The other thing you mentioned is that our government's getting in the business of picking winners in terms of some of those rebates for, I think you mentioned biotech, medical. Is that a similar thing, that the government is just, I think you say that they're not as sophisticated as merchant bankers at picking winners?
Well, yeah. I mean, and that's, it may well be, biotech is a great area for growth and probably is a good area for growth. But, I find it somewhat offensive when governments are saying, okay, we're going to give these people a stimulus because we think they are the areas which are going to be gung-ho and going to lead us out of poverty in the years to come. I mean, we've seen governments in Australia do this for almost forever. And it was going to be textiles and motor vehicles. And then, we had this great idea that we were building all these wind farms. So we'd invest in blade factories, windmill blade factories. Of course, promptly went bust as soon as the money was laid out. So I mean, it's much better, I think, if the government doesn't do any of this thing, doesn't try to be selective in terms of forming investment. It doesn't know things that over and above what the entrepreneurs know. The public servants themselves, as you quoted there, they're not Macquarie bankers. They're basically just guys like me, maybe you, who know a little bit, but haven't got their own money on the line, and so they tend to pick the winners, but the winners are, more often than not, tend to be losers.
Tell us where you think MMT's going. MMT, which Jim Rogers says is, he says it stands for more money today. I've been the last week going deeper into MMT and just trying to understand the intellectual underpinnings of it, but I still can't get past, the conversations I have with my own children, that you can't magically create base money without a productive, without it coming from production. So where do you think it's taking us?
Well, it's taking us a long way at the moment in terms of the way government policies are moving, even though most governments, most officials, and certainly most politicians would tend to say that it can't work. They are trying to make it work. They're sort of leveraging their own political futures off it, and the people who are favouring MMT say, well, what's your problem? Basically, we're doing pretty well. We've increased this. We're spending money, and we don't have that inflation which you forecast. Well, I mean, yeah, and that appears to be the case. I mean, that there's certainly sort of indications that the inflation may take off over recent weeks. The U.S. inflation rate went up 4.2% in the last month. And there are various people who are now saying, there is inflation, and others are saying, well, the inflation is there really, but you can't see it because it's in bricks and mortar and houses and various things like that. You'd have to say in the end, even though the relationship of money supply and real wealth and inflation is very difficult to detect, very difficult to scientifically determine the cause and effect. It's got to be that if you actually dump a lot more money on the economy without producing the goods, there's got to be inflation in the end. It's being prevented or being stopped at the moment because people are holding a lot of money in bank balances, more money than they used to hold. You can't say that that's going to happen forever. But when it does take off, it may take off slowly, and gradually governments will pin it back and prevent it happening. But it may take off very rapidly, as it has in various countries in the past.
Yeah, you finished that article where you're saying that the outcome of all of what we're talking about, at least for this country and probably for a few developed economies, is, you say, it's either slow Latin American decline or an abrupt crash. What's your gut feeling on where things are heading as you look into the next decade?
Well, I would say the former, the low. There is likely to be a low decline. I mean, if there's a crash, that has some benefits. I mean, it certainly wipes a lot of people out. It's very, very painful. But a crash does suddenly have this major understanding that we can't continue like that. We've got to go into austerity. We've got to do this and wind back the payment systems and things, and stop impeding people's decisions making in terms of efficiency. But that crash that often leads to poor policies, as it did in the United States, for example, in the 1930s, and takes a long time to get over. But the worst thing is the slow decline, the boiling frog sort of thing, and the Argentinian conundrum, which started over 100 years ago when Argentina had about similar per capita income to Australia and the United States, and is now calls itself, has done for many years now, a third world country. So that is the tragedy that may well unfold. that we'd continue along the lines that we've been continuing. And because Australia has got some phenomenal natural wealth, it's unlikely to go the sort of Bangladesh or Ethiopian route, but nonetheless, it's going to be a lot poorer than it would be.
Yeah, listening to you, it just sounds like a lack of stewardship in a way. Like I quoted last week Chris DeMuth from the Hudson Institute in the US. I read a paper of his, and he said that for the 181 years in the US, 181 years, right up till the closing of the gold window in 71, the US essentially ran balanced budgets, 181 years. And his theory was that basically there was a kind of moral imperative. There was a sense of, George Washington said that it was anathema for any generation to create debt that it couldn't pay off in its own lifetime. And just to see where we're at now with, like the US deficit and, the forward obligations, it's like a big historical shift, right?
It is. And, the people would take the contrary and say, well, look, people are going to be much richer in the future than we are. So, why shouldn't they pay more? If you can get away with it, then that makes a bit of sense. But as you say, no economists really thought in terms of deficit financing until Keynes. I mean, the governments were doing a bit of it now and again before Keynes in 1936, his general theory. Now, any economist who doesn't agree with it couldn't get a job in Treasury. There isn't, we have the Treasury. We don't know that we got 1,500 PhDs in the Australian Treasury, but we've got a lot. They're on the Reserve Bank, and they all think that it's great. We can do this, and maybe we're just going a little bit too far now. The Treasury Secretary said yesterday, perhaps we've got to wind back at some stage in the future. But he's been encouraging the government to spend ever since he was appointed.
Yeah, it sounds like a little bit of pregnancy. Maybe we've gone too far. It's I think once the hand has been put to the plow, it's funny, living here in Canberra, I'm a very committed cyclist and I ride a huge amount. Every Thursday morning, one of my rides finishes literally out the front of the Treasury building. And I always stop there and I put my headphones on and put some stuff on for the ride home. And it's funny sitting there, and I was saying this to one of my kids, there's essentially a room in there where with a computer screen where somebody is typing in 0000, and hitting enter. And it's like magical unicorn money just came into the world. And I'm like, when you explain it to a 5-year-old and they go, but you can't do that. I'm going, yeah, I know. So I wanted to ask you a couple of final things. I know you've got a TV interview to get to, and I want to ask you a couple of favorite questions of mine. Can you ever see the reestablishment of a gold standard? And do you think it'd be a good thing?
Well, yeah, I think it would be a good thing. I think it certainly would be a good thing. Can it be reestablished? Maybe Bitcoin will be, the gold standard in the future. Maybe that's there. I mean, it's going to have teething troubles. It's going to go up and down. I think there will be. Essentially, although governments will always steal your money, and they can't do it so much when there's a gold standard there, that people will look for ways in which they can avoid having the government take their money, and maybe gold will be in there, and other assets like that to do it. So we'll get something like that perhaps forced on government, because people will leave the national currencies which are depreciating vis-a-vis gold or Bitcoin or whatever else is invented.
So I know that your focus isn't necessarily on cryptos, but I just finished a bunch of study at Oxford in their crypto economics program, and my conviction is that there is no way in hell that central banks and sovereign governments are going to let private cryptocurrencies win. I just think central bank digital currencies, if they don't win, then the entire order of nation states and seigniorage and all that stuff collapses. So What you have any thoughts on that? I know that crypto is not a big necessary focus for you, but I can't see how governments don't use central bank digital currencies just to wipe out private cryptocurrencies.
Well, yeah, but then people would have to have confidence in the central bank's digital currencies. I mean,
Yeah,
I any confidence that we all have superannuation. I know the government's going to steal the superannuation eventually, and it
yeah,
already has in countries. So it's going to steal that no matter what sort of assurances it gave in the first instance. And I guess if the central banks bring in their own cryptocurrencies, then they will be successful if people think they are bona fide, and they will keep to them. Otherwise, people will seek to buy gold or buy Bitcoin or private sector things, and it's difficult to see how the government stops that happening. Governments globally would have to come to some sort of agreements and policing mechanism in ways that are difficult to envisage.
makes me think of that line: "Trust us, we're from the government, we're here to help." You can trust us with our new cryptocurrency. This time we'll behave.
Yeah.
Last couple of things. We don't give investment advice on the podcast, but can you suggest, in terms of hedging or just the global macro outlook over the next decade, what sorts of things would you suggest people should be thinking about in terms of protecting wealth?
Well, I guess the traditional answer is bricks and mortar and houses and all that sort of stuff. There is a problem in Australia in that respect, because houses are inflated in value as a result of regulation. I've done a lot of work in the course of my career on housing policies, and essentially we're very efficient producers of housing in Australia. We have a very dispersed system, non-union, and all that sort of stuff. But what we do is ration land or ration land usage. So if somebody on the outskirts on the New South Wales border beyond Canberra has got a farm, it might be worth, I don't know, $2,000 a hectare. If suddenly that farm is rezoned for housing, it's worth $200,000 per hectare or more maybe. So essentially, we've got very high housing prices in Australia simply because of regulation through government preventing land subdivisions and thereby creating a shortage. So that's an area where you could say, well, that would be great, and it may still be great, but it's not as good as it might have been given the government's decisions over the years. But so I mean, I guess those sorts of areas you'd think in terms of the better areas to go. Maybe areas in terms of IT where obviously there's going to be improvements somewhere, but like in the 1920s and 1930s, where clearly automobiles were the thing to do, and if you got it right, you were dead right. But a lot of automobile companies went bankrupt too. And we'll see that in IT as well.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I'm building out a blockchain consultancy, not cryptocurrency, but actually the blockchain stuff behind it in terms of helping businesses with use cases. And we're still very early in that tech phase of blockchain and decentralized ledgers, because you try to explain it to people, there's this glazed look over their eyes, like, nah, not getting it yet. So I think we're a few years away from the mass adoption there. All right, last thing is, when COVID hit, and basically we've seen this vast monetary and fiscal stimulus globally. I think there's now north of 30 trillion in excess global liquidity. If you had a magic wand, what would you have done differently? If you were, the Prime Minister, or, had said to you, hey, Alan, we're going to give you the keys, we're going to just give us a policy response, what would you have done differently, even if it was painful?
Well, I think the COVID response in Australia was a mixture of let's protect people who've suddenly become vulnerable as a result of the policies we've put in place to protect others. That is, so we've got to have a sense of a dole being given to people. But then, in addition to that, there was always the idea that we ought to stimulate the economy as well. And I wouldn't have done any of that. Certainly, there was a case for putting in some temporary respite funding for people, but the government went a lot further than that. And it talked about we need to stimulate, we need to do things over and again, over and above that. And indeed, in the US, the Democrats now are talking about, well, we've got to replace it, but replace it with something better. So it's using the COVID as an excuse to totally dismantle what they consider the noxious parts of the economy and replace them by others, which basically is, I guess, a socialistic response. So I think that there was always a case that you have to do something about COVID if you are going to, unless you're going to let it run rampant, which probably would have never been possible. You have to do something to protect those who you've created as casualties, but that's all you need to do. And you don't need to start stimulating the economy, because as we've seen, the economy will come racing back because you haven't destroyed anything. All you've done is put it on ice.
So at the root of all of that, is it simply a question of political economy? It's that politician. There's an interplay here, isn't there? Because if you look at Jude Winniski's The Way the World Works, and you mentioned this at the start, that politicians are responding to what they are sensing people want, and that's quite a Winniskian idea. Do you think as a populace there is just this increasing expectation for government largesse? So there's an interpenetration here that the people expect government to provide more and more, and the government is happy to keep doing it because they're relatively, for most politicians it's 4 to 8 years and then you're doing something else. Is that the dynamic?
I think it is. It's the same dynamic that's always been there. I mentioned it on a couple of articles, the American revolutionaries. They understood this, and they understood how democracy could kill the republic, because basically, people will vote themselves more money. And that's why the whole idea of the American Constitution, which is the same as the Australian Constitution, essentially, was in place to prevent governments actually doing that sort of thing, to give them much less leeway than they would want to actually seize money from other people and give it to those who are going to vote for them. And that's why the American Constitution served us so well for so long. But there are signs that, well, there are more than signs. We've been discussing that essentially is no longer serving that purpose. That once the government decides that it no longer is going to balance the budget, that there again we suddenly departed from those principles that were there to allow democracy to work in a way which didn't destroy the very which has given them the prosperity.
I can't remember whether it was Alexander Hamilton or Benjamin Franklin that said that if the people don't understand basically the value of their freedom, he said, then the fault is ours, and it's our job as politicians to remind them of the importance of their freedom and not to take it away. So it was an interesting idea. In all of this, my second master's I did was in philosophical anthropology, and this idea of ontology, that there are certain inalienable, if you will, aspects of personhood that people need to work. There's an inherent dignity in work and production. That's kind of what attracted me to SupplySide originally. I was like, we need to produce stuff. We need to work. And if you create a context, either through universal basic income or transfer payments where people are disincentivized, it's not just an economic question. It's a question around human dignity and human, just how culture develops. So for me, I'm starting to see we're in a very pivotal moment about what we think it means to be a culture. So, last question: Are you optimistic in the dismal science? Are you? What are you? As you look ahead, what are you thinking?
Well, I think that I'm optimistic in terms of we'll continue to see technology showing us improvements in living standards, etc. But I'm quite pessimistic in terms of the ability of governments to corral these animal spirits that we have as individuals, and to actually ensure that we don't steal the money from those who are producing the wealth that we're all enjoying, and we don't suppress those incentives that they have. I'm quite pessimistic that we will see a turnaround back to the level of more rampant capitalism, if you like, than we've been seeing in recent years.
Yeah, I think when you look at the 2008 bailout, I sort of said to my kids the other day that it's not really capitalism when the central bank prevents the actual, the natural functioning of an ecosystem and refuses to allow failure to happen. Then we're seeing something emerging that's quite different. So we're going to let you go because I know you've got to get across town. But I've absolutely enjoyed this. We're going to send people across to your work at regulationeconomics.com. We're going to put those links in the show notes. But I want to thank you for sharing your wisdom with us, and I just want to encourage you to keep writing because I'll be looking out for those articles in the months ahead.
Thanks, Jonathan, and keep televising as well, because it's very important that the message gets out and about, and you're doing a great piece of work doing that.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Appreciate you joining us.